Hi, everybody. It's Greg, one of the founders at career.pm, and we are trying an experiment around content. We call it off the cuff. And the idea is to have, fairly fluid, organic discussions about topics. I'm really happy today to be joined by Wolfgang Hilpert. He is the founder of Sensible Agility. Wolfgang and I go back way too far, way too many years. Multiple companies. We've worked together. We've had discussions about things for a long time. And not too long ago, we started a discussion on the interface between engineering and product management. And it was getting super interesting to me. So, we said, wait, let's stop this and let's just try to get this on tape. I think we're making interesting points. So welcome, Wolfgang.
Thank you. Welcome, Greg, and welcome everybody.
Yeah, so what I wanted to start the discussion off with, our discussion went on for a long time. We talked about a lot of topics, but at the heart of this issue, in my mind, is this idea of why, what, and how. You may have heard about that before. You can look at any activity that way, but PMs have a responsibility to look at activities around their product in that light. And to give you a very simple example, we can say, hey, it's Wolfgang's birthday. I want to bake a cake. That is the why. Saying, I want a cake that's chocolate, that has mango ice cream, that has 5 candles on it. That is the what. I'm describing what I want. Somebody else, a baker, namely, has to figure out how to implement that, how to make a chocolate cake that has the icing that I want, the number of levels. So just to level set, that is a really important paradigm for thinking about how products get built. And traditionally, the oversimplified model has been that product management is responsible for the why and the what of the product. That means, why are we building it? What are we trying to achieve? What markets are we going to serve? They own this, what we call a functional perspective of the what. I want a piece of software that does X, Y, and Z. And then engineering's job is to figure out how to implement that, how to actually build that. Well, I think anybody that's been involved in product development knows nothing is that simple, that straightforward. So that is kind of the entry point to our discussion. And, Wolfgang, we started talking about how, all right, so let's assume that accountability for the why and the what are with product management, that engineering does the how. In practice, that's not the way things work. I don't think that's optimal. What are the limitations, or what are kind of the caveats or nuances in there that we should address regarding that model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is obviously a very key topic. You can think about it in these, if you will, pillars of the what, the why, and the how. You could also think about this in kind of layers of maybe levels of detail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you could then distinguish on, let's say, a high level, 90,000 foot level, that, who drives or who owns a certain piece might be different than what it is on a more detailed and more refined level, right? That's probably an easy distinction, pretty intuitive. However, let's stick for a moment on this kind of like the horizontal axis, so on these vertical slices or these different key concerns. I would submit it's important to understand who, if push comes to shove, is really responsible for something. However, be clear, I push this through now because of my position power is a lever that will only work so and so often. If you keep doing this, like as your normal way of operating, you will find that this becomes a very uneasy and a very unproductive discussion very, very soon. Because
I guess each time you do that, it's going to get less effective. It's going to generate more work. So just going in and trying to tell engineering, for example, as a PM that, hey, I own the why.
Right.
You go off and implement is, really bad approach.
Right.
And I think what's interesting about this model is it really does come down to this kind of racy nomenclature. If you're familiar with the racy chart, I described who's accountable. So you can say product management is accountable for the why and the what, but as a team, we're all responsible for building a successful business. And some of your best feature ideas will come from engineering.
Exactly.
So it is really self-defeating to try to keep them busy coding exactly what you want instead of engaging, getting these two together. There's
Right.
always more power when we work with each other.
Exactly.
Some of your best ideas about the what, engineering will have some ideas about the why, which very often is manifested through, what we call strategy, the product strategy. How are we going to measure success? What do
Right.
we want to accomplish? In my experience, engineering has much more valuable input on those things than product management does on implementation, right?
Potentially, unless
Yeah,
maybe in their past life they might have been an architect or developer themselves. But then that can get really dangerous too. So, in a sense, what you want is really a healthy tension between the two parts of the organization or of the team. What's very important is that this is more like in a sports and is really seen as a team, right? We're in this together. So I've not seen one product team that was successful by itself if this meant their engineering team was failing. And you could flip that just as
sure.
well. The engineering team itself could be having star programmers and really top-notch developers all over the place and best testing environment and what have you. If they weren't really coupled with a very competent and also very successful product engineering or product team, they won't be successful either. So this is the first thing you need to understand. We're in this together. We will succeed together or we'll fail together. So if I see a weakness, for example, as an engineering part of the team in a product team, it's not a wise idea to start finger pointing. It is a much wiser approach to ask, how can I help? How can I
Yeah.
make sure that we together are successful, right?
So much in there, Wolfgang. So I love this idea of healthy tension. I use that term a lot as well. And I think it's that perfect case of putting a name on something that's intuitive and all of a sudden it becomes powerful.
Mhm.
And that is something that the whole team has to manage. You've got the why and the what, you've got the how. And what I want to do is build this tension so that engineering is keeping me from just letting my imagination run amok and come up with a what that isn't even, feasible.
Mhm.
And I know in my career, I know you've seen this as well. Sometimes when we're technically oriented, that somehow limits our perspective of what we think is possible. And it's valuable to have somebody come in from outside and say, the market wants sub-second response time.
Mhm.
Let's do it. Let's
Mhm.
find a way to do it. And I think we've both seen engineering teams stand up to that challenge, question their own kind of assumptions or constraints, and deliver something that they might not have if they didn't have this other perspective.
Yeah, yeah. It's important that you think of maturing, kind of like your view of the business viability, right? The need with the feasibility. So how well is this even doable? At what cost? At what risks? At what drawbacks potentially? Trade-offs that you might have to make. And then don't forget the level of desirability, right? So this is where it's not enough to just be usable. So it's kind of like almost self-explaining, hopefully fully self-explaining. No, it needs to be in a way that people really love to use it, that they want to use it, they want more of it, right? That
Mhm.
really makes a successful product. That's also covered right in the design thinking, these three dimensions: viability, feasibility, desirability. And what my point here is, it doesn't help a lot if I have a totally well-baked business plan that explores the viability of the business to the nth degree. But I really have no freaking idea how I'm going to build this thing or how it will look
Mhm.
like, right? Neither does it help if I have the most grandiose design architecture, the best product I could ever imagine, yet the user experience with it will be so poor that nobody can ever figure it out, nor it's unclear whether there's any user ever going to want it, there's any
Yeah.
business for it, right? So what you
Yeah.
have to do is you have to mature your level of understanding of the opportunity on all these 3 dimensions at best in lockstep, right? So do an
Yeah.
experiment, try something, maybe just a part of this capability or this functionality from a viability point of view, feasibility point of view, and desirability point of view. Run that experiment, collect feedback, hopefully from real customers that either already pay you right there or would be paying you in future. And then keep iterating, keep improving on all
Yep.
these 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
That's key.
Yeah. When I think back of the healthiest relationships I've had with engineering, I think back to our time at Microsoft. Wolfgang and I were together at Microsoft years ago. I was always impressed with the intelligence and perspective of folks on the engineering team, and they were not pushovers, and neither were we. I felt like there really was, you could feel this healthy tension that
Mhm.
everybody was trying to make a successful product. They were trying to reel me back in when it was necessary. I was trying to maybe push them sometimes when it was necessary. But since we had this shared sense of goals, since we really felt like a team, it never felt personal. It wasn't personal tension. It's like, how do we as a group of individuals, like advocating for our perspective, create the best outcome? And that's
Right.
a great feeling, and far too rare, probably.
Right. But you made a key pointer. Let me just underline that. Shared goals. So that's the other dysfunction I've seen in many of these teams. If you set up goals for one part of the organization like this and the other like that, how can you expect
Yeah.
that the
Well,
team
you know what to
underneath?
expect. If you don't align incentives, if you actually measure people on things that are contradictory, you can imagine what will happen. What I would like to do, Wolfgang, is, kind of couch this in terms where I think it has the most operational impact. And that has to do with setting priorities,
Mhm.
right? So there is tons of information available for PMs on how to prioritize features. And in many ways, that is kind of the core capability of a PM. The end of
Yep.
the day, to look at all these things and come up with a set of priorities. In many instances, there's some disagreement, even tension or hostility between engineering and PM. Let's just call it scope, based on scope, thinking about a release. It's something that I have seen before. And I think an interesting question to answer, I don't think it has a simple answer, but an interesting question to explore, maybe that's a better term, is who is responsible for setting priorities, what work we do?
Mhm. Yeah, so that is the kind of like be the key voice of the customer interest, right? I think that is ultimately the product responsibility, right? So in larger organizations, there will be product management that sets the goals for what kinds of products, what do our portfolio even going to look like, right? How do we develop it? How do we evolve that? In larger organizations, you might then have the distinction between product managers, and as you go into more, how should I say, smaller, more detailed levels of how you implement that, you might have Scrum product owners, right, that take those higher level, maybe epic or even theme level, high level ideas, themes, right, and break them into smaller parts. And then it becomes closer and closer to the engineering side, where it's getting closer to the how, right? How do you actually going to build this? But in the basic question there that you ask, the answer needs to be, this is really the person that is driving the product success, right? Needs to be able to call the shots. What are essentially the battles we choose, we pick, right?
Sure.
Right, so that has to be, whether a particular feature is in there or not, right? That's an interesting question, and that's where you get to, hopefully you're not just looking into one feature or the other in isolation. You hopefully rather look at epics or user stories. How do they actually play together and really add and create customer value, right? And then that is most likely going to be a joint decision, right? How we best do these. If you're really a little bit more evolved, you will have a user story mapping to always ensure that after each iteration, after each of your sprints, you keep a close eye on, did I add value that is visible to the customer?
Yeah,
Time after
absolutely.
time. and
And
then come back,
I
right?
think an interesting point, Wolfgang, is that there can be discussion about what features we ship.
Yep.
Where I often see more tension is requirements from what I consider another stakeholder, which is engineering. Let's just take technical debt, for example.
Right.
The work that needs to be done or engineering feels needs to be done will not necessarily create any customer value per se,
Right.
nothing that they will perceive short term.
Yep.
And there you very often see this tension between how much, capacity do we have for features, how
Yep.
much capacity do we need from this other stuff. And I
Yep.
think the most dysfunctional kind of manifestation of that I've seen is I've been in situations, we were at a very big software company together. And when we would start to plan a release, the head of engineering would come to me and say, all right, this is how many people I have and how many person hours we're planning for this release. This is all the stuff that I need to do, all the technical debt and stuff. So you have X capacity to do features.
Yep.
That was a big culture shock to me, and I can tell you a source of a lot of
Frustration.
hard feelings
Yes.
and
Yeah.
contention.
Now, whatever, a decade later, you still remember it to the day, right? So
I'm still a little bitter.
yeah, you're still a little bitter, so that's okay. Let me try to heal. So first off, I mean, obviously now in hindsight, I would look at this and say this was already a sign of distrust, right? What should
Mhm.
happen? I mean, my strong recommendation would be there should only be a single backlog. There's one backlog that contains
Music to my ears,
all
Wolfgang.
work, right? However, that this game really works needs two-hand clapping. So if a product side, right, the product manager plays hardball and keeps squeezing out what the engineers propose or even fight hard for, that there need to be investments to improve their build system, whatever,
Mhm,
to make
mhm.
them more productive, right? If their requirements there fall on deaf ears, right, then this will inspire what I would call dysfunctional behavior, which is, oh, now I lock in this amount of work, right, and or worse, I actually don't even show you, right? So I have a shadow backlog. I have an official
Yeah.
backlog and a shadow backlog.
We call those submarine projects.
Exactly. Now
And
you
I've
can't
definitely
really
seen
track
those in
at
my
all.
career. So that's a great point, Wolfgang. The
Right.
other side of that, I think it's dysfunctional for engineering to say, hey, this is how much I'll give you for features.
Yeah.
It
No.
makes no sense as a product manager to say, we're only going to do stuff that adds obvious value to the
Exactly.
customer, because you will hamstring yourself long term.
Exactly.
You won't pay that technical debt, and you will get to a point that it affects your business performance.
And I
Those
can
are kind of like two extremes, right?
I absolutely, and I have actually after we departed from that company, I have been leading an engineering team in another company, and my counterpart, the product manager, fortunately, the lead product manager was very how should I say, open-minded, right? So he would also challenge me, but we had very productive debates about this.
Yeah.
And so, for example, we were seeing that the teams were really wrestling with late discoveries and a lot of test escapes, right? That were due to multiple reasons. There were years of lack of refactoring and keeping up to date the
Oh, yeah.
architecture. The build system was weak. The test automation level was below in many areas, et cetera, et cetera. And so our joint manager, a direct line manager, who was the business unit head, was obviously getting frustrated about these late arrivals or late surprises in the release
Mm-hmm.
cycle of
Of
any major
course.
release. And I kept saying to both of them, look, we can now complain about this and I can try to punish people and whatnot, right? Or we'll actually think about what's behind this. And behind this is, reasons that I just iterated. So what are we going to do about that? So that's where we agreed, actually, the three of us together agreed. We actually reserve 20% of the engineering capacity, so like 1 day per week,
Mm-hmm.
until certain metrics, for example, test escapes, turn around and become more healthy. Until we are getting back to that state, we had agreed this is how much we put aside. And oh, by the way, this was not a buffer. This was not like the fudge factor that if you misunderstood your requirement or your technical capabilities or whatnot, you get this as kind of like a safety, right? No. What we did was we said every team has the ability to invest 20% of their capacity in reducing tech debt, improving their way of working. However, that's the one side. The other hand clapping is providing visibility into what are you planning to do there and how do you measure whether this is making progress or no. So write a user story, like for any other investments you're making. For, we're doing these and these things to the build system. We're doing these and these things, how we're selecting the most vulnerable regression test areas. So that's where we focus our test automation improvement focus, right?
Yeah.
So,
sounds, Wolfgang, it just sounds like nirvana. So
right.
I think there's a lot to be learned. If I were going to simplify the last part of our conversation, it's, there are a bunch of us stakeholders in a release. There are customers, there are internal stakeholders. You may have requirements around integrating with other products. What's important is to put everything out on the table.
Yes.
And I love this idea of getting engineering and PM together. Maybe at the beginning, also having leadership there to help break ties and to provide insight that the others may not have. And I am a big fan of this top-down guidance, something to manage to, which says, you know what, in our current state, if we are not investing at least 20% of our cycles in sharpening the axe and getting better, we are very likely going to pay for it, short-term, midterm, whatever. So let's manage to that. Let's look at what we've got to do. And you know what, we may find out that these things are really big things and that there's no point in doing any of them unless we give them 30% of our capacity. That may be a finding, but you came to it based on some guidance, some agreement. So Wolfgang, this has been a really great conversation. I really enjoyed completing some of the thinking that we started on.
Yes.
I would love to do this again. And, I didn't mention that at the beginning, but, our overall entry point into this was really talking about how an organization can be really agile, what it means to be really agile. So I think we set the foundation to have some more conversations. I hope we do that. I will make sure that folks have links to find you online. And yeah, I hope we do this again really soon.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm looking forward to that. Great.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.